Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second module for our week. This video will focus on the specific aspects of writing for online and digital news. Now, online news is becoming increasingly needed within any newsroom, regardless of whether you're working for a digital only, whether you're working for a legacy company like a newspaper or a television station or radio. Pretty much any journalist is going to have to learn how to write for online news. Now, while the television stations are still the preferred way to get local news for US adults, online news for the first time in 2019 became the second most used type of news source for US adults. In fact, 23% use news websites or apps, and 15% prefer social media. So it has now surpassed print and radio as the desired means of getting news. 8 in 10 Americans who get local news online say that the most important feature is an easy to use website. So that means that we as journalists have to write so that the articles are easy to use, easy to read, and easy to take in information accurately. In terms of what the industry looks like for online news, employment is increasing within online news outlets. In a 10-year period, we see roughly 6,000 new jobs added for online news. However, online news organizations are still facing the same cutbacks that many in the journalism industry are facing as well. One key aspect to remember is that surveys show that Americans are very skeptical of the information that they see on social media and online news, which makes it critical for us as online journalists to provide credible and factual information in what we write. Now, online news is a term that tends to encompass many things. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as digital news, sometimes online news. But when we're talking about this, we're talking about news that you would find on a website, on an app, on social media, or even on your mobile devices. And so this type of news that encompasses so many different types of news platforms relies on digital revenue. And this is why online news is so important because digital revenues from advertising have been outpacing traditional advertising for years. And that means that companies are going to place more stock into online news because it makes more money for the organization. And so, we as journalists, regardless of whether we're going into print, TV, digital only, we need to know how to write for online news because that's where the money is coming from. So, often as a journalist, you're going to be producing your stories for multiple types of outlets. So, keep that in mind as you're writing. Now, there's specific things that you need to know about writing for online news. As I mentioned, trust in online news is much lower than for other types of news outlets. And so it is important that we continue to remain objective and use facts within our writing. Other things that remain the same from our print instruction are AP style, grammar, and spelling. These are things that add to your credibility, which also increases audience trust in what you're producing. So, if you are clear and concise, using the proper style and proper grammar, that's going to increase the amount that your audience will trust your writing. Just like with print, you want to use subject, verb, object sentences that are pretty clear and straightforward. You're going to want to use active voice and action verbs, and you want to avoid overusing adjectives and adverb. Again, going back to that objectivity and lack of bias within your reporting. Now, another key feature of writing online is web usability. As we talked about, 8 in 10 Americans want an easy to use news website. And so, what that means for us as writers is that we need to get the information to them very clearly and visually. So, the ways that we can do that are to have informative subheads in what we're writing. This means that instead of just having large blocks of news, we're going to have a heading with a little bit of text under it, a heading with a little bit of text, and we're going to try to break up our writing as much as possible to avoid those long blocks of news and text. You also want to use bold type on proper nouns or important points to make them stand out to the reader. You're going to want to use bulleted list that suggest easy ways to read somewhat complicated information. You want to keep paragraphs short, one idea per paragraph. Typically, this means that an entire paragraph is no more than one or two sentences. So each time you begin a new thought, start a new line. This is especially important for writing for online news. And then online news also needs to be very visual. You need to have pictures or graphics. In broadcasting, we call this see dog, show dog. The same applies for online news because it's a very visual medium. So here's an example of subheads that USA Today uses for coverage of the Supreme Court hearings. So you can see we have a little bit of traditional news text here, and it does get kind of long. The only thing really breaking it up at that point are the advertisements. But here we can see that we're starting a new type of story. Senators hear personal stories. We see 27 people were arrested. So this is almost like a bunch of different stories that have all been placed together so that if someone is interested in learning about the confirmation hearings, all they have to do is come to this one source. It's also important to note that they are using photo galleries, which are very popular for online news. Again, the more visual you can be, the better. So another way that you can break up information is through bulleted text. So this article is actually about some heart research that's being done by the American Heart Association. You can see, I know it's really small. I wanted to emphasize how long and complicated this research medical story was. You can see at the top that they highlight what the top three things, like if you didn't read any further than those top three bullets, you would get the gist of this information. But then they produce a regular, uh, piece on down, but they highlight the findings of the research with 4 bullets below. You can see throughout the article that they have hyperlinks. It's the light blue. It's a little harder to see within the text, but on the actual website, it's a little more friendly. And then you have additional resources down at the bottom so that if you're interested in learning more about this topic, you can hyperlink to other areas as well. So we want to make the story readable by avoiding those block text. We want to think of ways to present information visibly or visually rather. And that means making the article scannable and splittable. Scannable refers to highlighting key words to make points and repeating information in new ways throughout the story so that if someone kind of jumps in the middle of the article, they can still pick up a bit of the information. Splittable also means that you're breaking a larger story into many stories by linking to other stories. So it's better to have 3 short stories that all link together through hyperlinks than it would be to create one long story that is a little harder to navigate. Nielsen refers to this as a set of pyramids floating in cyberspace, which refers to the inverted pyramid style, of course, where you have short, to the point, concise news being presented, but then linking to each other, floating around as a set. And there is business profit in doing that because your advertisers are going to pay more the longer someone remains on a site and the more they click through to other pages on your website. So the more hyperlinks you can provide, the longer they'll remain on your website and the more clicks that you'll receive, which is how we make money as a news organization. So here's an example of some more readable uh, things that make this story interesting. So this is a graphic that the New York Times put together in one day about Notre Dame when it was on fire earlier this year and how they are renovating it. And so you can see that this is a 17-second clip that kind of shows what they're trying to show. It adds a layer of visual element to tell the story. And again, this is something that they created in one day. Not that I expect us to create 3D models for this class or anything, but you can see what the expectation is in the industry. We also want to be able to add depth for our online writing, but we do that not by necessarily making the story longer, but by making it more interactive and visual. So a couple of ways that we can do that is by making it clickable through interactivity, like having graphics or other elements that can add depth to the story. I'm going to show you an example of a great use of this here in a second. Also hyperlinking information. So if you're referring to a study that's been done, hyperlink to that study. Provide an open um, sourcing of your information. This also means that we as journalists can be more transparent with the ways that we gather news and information, which builds trust with the audience. Slideshows with or without audio are also great because they provide a strong visual element to the story. A lot of online news borrows from broadcast journalism in the elements that they use, such as audio or video, to tell stories better. And so slideshows are an excellent way to do this as well. And then, of course, if you want real interactivity with your audience, you could add surveys, you could do questions and answers on a topic. Some websites provide comments for readers, others don't. And so that's something that you have to discuss with your news organization and think about the ethics that surround online comments. But these are all ways that you can add depth to your writing. So here's an example. This is a story that was done last year based on police departments inflating rape clearance cases. And so, what you could do, you could actually go and find a local law enforcement agency to get their data. But you also have all of the data available for all of these police departments visually available. So, data journalism is really important for online news because it is visual, it is factual, and it really tells a story in a unique and interesting way. So be thinking about when you're writing, how can I tell this story in a more visual aspect? And that will certainly increase the depth and interactivity with your piece. So now that you understand a little bit more about how we write for online news, I want you to go into your discussion post. Here, I'm going to allow you to pitch 2 story ideas for features, get feedback from peers so that when you do your final pitches, which are due Friday, you'll have a little bit of feedback from your fellow students. Please note that the deadline for the discussion post is noon as opposed to midnight, because I want you to have enough time to read the comments from other people and then change your pitch ideas based on those commentaries. In addition, make sure you do your workbook, chapter 12, exercise 1, and begin working on your pitches and thinking through your feature stories, which will be the final feature story will be due on the 30th.